Welcome to another episode of our Creator Series, where we chat with creatives from all backgrounds to give you insights into their process. You'll get to hear about success, failure, words of wisdom, and in the end, gain a whole new appreciation for what goes into the things we enjoy every day. Today we're chatting with Ryan Pigg and Eddie Furth, comedians, writers, Eddie's also an actor, and co-creators and hosts of the live show Historical Roast. Since 2014, they've roasted historical figures such as Abraham Lincoln, Marilyn Monroe, Cleopatra, Michael Jackson, Helen Keller, and many more. After more than 50 roasts, it was picked up by Netflix in 2018, with Jeff Ross as the host, and Ryan and Eddie as co-executive producers. You can see the live show at the world-famous Comedy Store in Hollywood, California. Hi, Ryan and Eddie. Welcome to our show.
Thanks for having us.
How's it going?
You both met as interns at Nerd Melt Theater several years ago, which is a little theater in the back of LA's Meltdown Comics, which was basically known for their support of, quote, alternative content. So tell us what brought you two together specifically for the creative purposes of, historical roast.
I always love the way that you tell the story about the the orientation meeting, Kristen Spicer's goodbye.
Yeah, so we were robbing a bank. We started out as free interns, worked for free, unpaid, and at Nerd Melt, which was a really great place. I was told you could get free improv classes if you just intern at Nerd Melt. So I was like, I can do that. And through that, they were like, hey, we're doing like a fun little party where you meet everyone. I was like, cool. And we go there. There's this comedian named Kristen Spicer who's on his way out. He was an employee there. And
on his way out sounds so obvious. He was on his way out.
He was pursuing other opportunities.
He failed. Hollywood kicked him to the curb.
Not leaving. So he was like, hi, I'm Christian. I'm like, hi, I'm Ryan. I'm one of the new interns. He goes, oh.
He was like, hi, I'm Christian. Ryan was like, hi, I'm Baptist.
I'm Catholic. And I was like, I'm Ryan. I'm one of the new interns. And he's like, oh, you're the new intern. I thought Eddie was the new intern. Eddie! This guy says he's a new intern. I don't know about you guys. I'm Team Ryan. And so everyone was like, oh, I'm Team Eddie. I'm Team Ryan. And before we knew it, before we even met, we were enemies.
It started, every one of the staff members had sort of divided themselves onto Team Ryan or Team Eddie. And I'll be honest, it still hurts me to this day to admit there were more people on Team Ryan than on Team Eddie.
The gang fights were brutal.
Was it kind of like West Side Story? You'd circle each other and snap your fingers?
Yeah.
Because once you're Team Ryan or Team Eddie, you're Team Ryan or Eddie for life. It's not, you can't switch teams.
That was just till the end. I'm trying to remember West Side Story.
So to get back at Ryan, I was like, we should make a Netflix show together. That'll teach him.
Speaking to me, I can hear what you're saying. So one day we were just
we had this really weird, ominous start where our introduction to each other was this odd Team Ryan and Team Eddie thing. The part of developing the show that always struck me was that, truthfully, before we started this, we weren't friends. Like, we knew each other. We worked together plenty of times, but it's not like we were even two of the staff members or interns that would hang out or work together more often. It's not like we were creative partners trying to workshop ideas with each other. The idea for Historical Roast came one night when we were working at Nerd Melt. Actually, Ryan was working. I had come just to see the show that night because it was the kind of place you'd hang out all the time just to watch comedy. That night, Justin Willman was going through a show called Sleight of Mouth, which would turn into a pilot for Comedy Central that he shot before it wound up becoming Magic for Humans, which is on Netflix now. It's one of my favorite Netflix shows. And so Justin Willman is putting on these sort of pilot presentations so he can fine-tune what he's going to do for Comedy Central. I go to watch, and there were two shows that night, and one of the interns had not shown up that night. So in between shows, they just said, Eddie, could you help us turn the room over? Like, could you straighten the chairs, put more things out, just get more water if we need? I was like, yeah, it was no problem. As a comedian in LA, I had started to get a burr under my saddle. Is that even the right term? I had started
if you're from the
it 1800s. Is now.
I had a snake in my boots.
Something was twisting my lasso.
My flag was twisted in the wind. And by golly, no, I had
There's a prairie dog in my britches.
Hey now.
Is that from Tennessee?
No, prairie dogs specifically? No,
In your
I
britches?
think that's on his Tinder
my
profile.
Britches are from Tennessee.
So as a comedian in LA, I had started to feel like I could put on a show in LA. Like I knew enough funny comedians. That's all it was. Like I knew enough funny comedians that if I put together a show, I felt like the show would be good. Like I didn't know if I could draw, but I was like, that could be a funny show. But at Nerd Melt, the shows weren't your basic stand-up shows. It wasn't like it was just, 15-minute sets like the Comedy Store or like the Improv. They were known for alternative formats like game shows or what are some of the other things that they had?
They would have Horrible Movie Night where they'd show a B movie, really a C movie, and then the audience could just roast it, like yell out stuff, and whoever said the best like roast joke about the movie would win stuff. And they'd have popcorn. It was just like a fun time. They'd have comedians come up between parts of the movie and perform comedy. There was also Baby Talk where
Baby Talk was a big influence on historical. I knew Dan Levy who ran Baby Talk, and it was sort of a new twist on Kids Say the Darndest Things, where they'd get a panel of judges like they actually did it as a web series. You could see like Blake Griffin is on it, Bo Burnham is on it. They get like 3 or 4 comedians, and then they bring a kid out and they talk to the kid. The one I remember seeing of that was Jonathan Lipnicki.
I was there with you, yeah.
From Jerry Maguire, reenacted the famous "The Human Head Weighs 8 Pounds" scene with the kid from Baby Talk. Yeah. So you had this incredible theater that's doing all this like outside the
town. They had Meltdown,
live podcasts. They had all these things that lent to the idea of what would you do if you took funny people and instead of just asking them to do their bits and their routines, what if you also put them in interesting situations or formats? And so while we're turning the room over for in between Justin Willman's shows, I just kind of turned to Ryan and I was like, so what's missing from the schedule? Like what's not on the calendar? Because if you're going to do something, it should be something that ideally isn't being done. Otherwise you're filling space that somebody else is already filling. Mm-hmm. But I was just like, what's not being done?
I was like, I'll humor him and I'll...
Probably true. You probably were like, I have no interest to have this... Why is he asking me this question? What does he mean, what's missing? Like, did we not finish putting the chairs out?
The reason I remember your name is because there was a Team Ryan, Team Eddie thing. I just looked at the calendar. I was like, there's no roasts. And then like I looked over and he has like this like disappointed father look. I'm like, no, not roast, because no comedian here could bring really an audience for like a roast of themselves.
Right, because whoever you're roasting has to be an interesting figure that people are going to want to see roasted.
But they can't be too big and alive, because then we could get sued. So they'd have to be big and dead.
And that always interests me. I'm the Jewish one in the partnership, and I never thought about litigation, but immediately Ryan was like, well, we don't want to get sued.
Always think about litigation.
And he was like, so they would have to be dead. And so immediately I was like, so you mean historical figures? You want to roast historical figures? Like, what do you mean? How would that even work? Like,
and the movie starts with a zoom in, like, yes, I do. And then
like most people, when they first heard of it, they're like, so you're just kind of like a picture of the person up there? And I was like, no. You dress comedians as historical figures, and then you have other historical figures and comedians roast that guest of honor. So it was just like a Friars Club roast or a celebrity or a Dean Martin style roast.
I remember us listing it out too when we were thinking about the idea. We were like, so Lincoln, you're like, yeah, John Wilkes Booth would be there, or Mary Todd. And like with JFK, you'd have Marilyn Monroe, and for
Ben
Cleopatra,
Franklin probably came up with that night.
Yeah.
So at the end of the night, we had just sort of bullshitted this idea. But at the end of the night, because I have this theory about ideas, like just like good jokes, like once it gets stuck in your head, you're not gonna forget about it, right? Great ideas are things that, like, it should bug you. It should just sit in your mind and not let you stop thinking about it. So I just said to Ryan at the end of the night, if we're still thinking about this tomorrow morning, that means it's a good idea and we actually need to pursue this. And it was probably 10 a.m. the next morning that I emailed him because I hadn't stopped thinking about it. I was like, we should sit down at Panera Bread in North Hollywood.
Which we outlived, because now it is closed.
That shit's gone and we're still here, motherfucker.
We outlived.
Outlasting Panera Bread since 2014.
No, you beat Hollywood if you could outlast the fucking Panera Bread in North Hollywood where you met.
Right.
If your show outlasts the restaurant you first had, that you first took a meeting in to discuss the idea, your idea wins. That's how you get a Netflix show. You just outlast the building that you first proposed it in.
Hey, if you're entering Hollywood, it says all that on the sign.
Yeah,
if you outlive Panera and all that stuff.
If you haven't visited Hollywood, there is a the Hollywood sign, the big Hollywood sign that everyone sees.
They live in LA.
Yeah, but I'm talking to anyone who's viewing this who's not. I mean, I know Evin and Tatiana, right? You guys understand. You've seen the Hollywood sign, right, guys?
Oh yeah.
And at the bottom
We're
of it
at the Hollywood
says,
sign right now.
if you want a TV show, outlast the building that you created the show in and performed it in, and you'll get a series.
It's small print, but it is there.
Yeah. People don't know because they don't usually go hike that far. They get to Griffith Park or the Griffith Observatory and they give up.
They just call it, yeah.
All the Griffith Observatory says is follow your dreams. They don't know the secrets.
They don't know the specifics that it takes.
They're like, you can shoot a movie here that'll lose to, what was the one that actually won that time? It wasn't Moonlight.
Moonlight.
Joke would have been funnier if I remember the reference quicker.
Now, out of curiosity, I do have to ask this. Now, talking about roasts, you guys came up with the historical roast. You're like, well, this is what's missing, but what were your first experiences with a roast, whether it was watching one or participating in one? But what was the first experience for both of you guys, and how do you feel it impacted your thoughts on comedy as a whole?
I remember the Dean Martin roast growing up. I was shown that a lot. Actually, before I moved to LA, I was in Chicago and I was watching some of the roasts with a friend who loves Dean Martin. And I was like, man, they don't really do, I guess they do these on Comedy Central, but besides that, they don't really do that many roasts anymore as far as I knew. And then I kind of just always, roasting in general has always just been things that I did with my friends too, because I love them and I know the most about them. So I would just roast them and they would roast me back. And growing up, it was always kind of part of my life, but I never thought I'd host a show or even be on a roast. The last thing I remember though, before I even met you, I was living in a house in Chatsworth and we had a friend who was super sensitive, but I had so many roast jokes that I could not tell him because he was so sensitive. And one time he was like, we should do, or someone in our house was like, we should do, as a goodbye party, we should do a roast. And Ryan could host and then we'd roast us four. And I was so excited. I was like, fuck yeah. And then our friend who's sensitive, he's like, no, I don't think I can handle it. I'm like, fuck yeah, you wouldn't handle it. God, no. So hard.
You can't handle the roast. Yeah, I like it.
That was my opening line. It would set up a courtroom and he'd be in the seat. But yeah, that was all I knew. What about you?
The funniest, this is actually, I'm going to say this in response first. That is a phenomenal question. It's the first time in our round of going through this that anyone has asked about roasts and where they came up. Mine is actually, especially with how this all wound up, is so uncanny. Ironic doesn't cover it. The first place I ever really became aware of roasts or roasting people was essentially through White Men Can't Jump. Which, one of my favorite movies of all time. One of my goals is to star in White Men Still Can't Jump, the inevitable sequel, where both Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes make an appearance, but it's about me and my new partner trying to hustle just like in White Men Can't Jump. But that movie opens with Kadeem Hardison, who played Dwayne Wayne in A Different World, and another basketball player, and the basketball players are essentially roast battling each other before roast battle's ever a thing, right? They're going, the famous ones were because what it led to was at our lunch tables in the cafeteria, we would have what we call diss fights, and you'd use all the jokes you knew, like your mom's so poor, I saw her kicking a can down the street the other day. I said, what are you doing? She said, moving.
Oh, God.
Or your mom's so fat it takes her a year to turn around. All the stuff that you would just kids Yo Mama jokes that led to Yo Mama and then roast battle and then it's Comedy Central's roast with Bob Saget. I knew of the Friars Club and Dean Martin and things like that, but when Comedy Central came back with their annual roasts, that's when the format of a roast came back into the forefront of my mind, because before that it was White Men Can't Jump and diss battles at the lunch table where you just insult each other until you went outside to play, I guess.
Yeah.
It stopped when you went out to play kickball. It didn't matter. But you know, like, then I grew up an athlete, and trash talking was huge. It was very important that on a basketball court in high school, of all things, you were getting the mental edge by insulting them, and you'd watch Reggie Miller and Michael Jordan talk trash, and Larry Bird was known for talking trash. I'm looking at you like you've ever watched a game of basketball.
The oval one, right?
Do you know Larry Bird?
I know him personally, yeah.
I mean, all people know Larry
Anyone
Bird.
with the last name of an animal knows each other. Ryan Pigg, Larry Bird, Megan Fox.
Yes.
I also know anything that's like pig related. I know John Hamm. I know Kevin Bacon.
Then again, a lot of people know Kevin Bacon, though,
that's-
from what
yeah.
we understand. So.
It's, yeah, there's some sort of degree to it.
Yeah. So that's where I started with roasts, and then it's just, as a comedian, once I got really into stand-up, roasting is one of those. It's essentially the origin story of comedy along with vaudeville, right? When you talk about pure stand-up, because roasting is a joke writing forum in general. You're not talking about developing an act. You're talking about set up, punchline. This person's an idiot, you know.
Oh, poor person.
Yeah, we grew up.
Say, that's fair. There, within roasting, because this is also what I first knew about roasting. I also grew up in Connecticut.
Don't say where you
I grew up
grew
in
up.
Connecticut, and so
Don't like hearing you're from Connecticut, Eddie.
people would have ceremonies and dinners where you would get roasted at the dinner or at the ceremony, right? Like it wasn't a pure roast, but if somebody was giving a speech at it, like at a wedding in Connecticut, one of the people who's giving a speech would try to roast you a little, you know? I hate one of my Connecticut shows.
Flashed your Connecticut everywhere.
Oh, I hate it.
We might have to censor the
Could
screen
you
just for that
dub
moment.
over like Minneapolis over Connecticut? Even Minnesota's less white than Connecticut.
Use the audio of the states he just said and just use it over.
Yeah, see?
I'm totally
I-
from Minneapolis.
Talking New Jersey.
Not Iowa, Eddie. Anything.
The
but
Valley.
Well, it's interesting too because I feel like you have to, in a way, really love who or what you're roasting because you have to know all of these details about them that you wouldn't necessarily know if you weren't so knowledgeable about it.
Now, our show definitely can break that format in terms of roasting somebody from history that you may not like Hitler or Stalin. We've had them all on the dais, but in general, yeah, Jeff Ross has a great saying that most people in roasting kind of abide by, which is you only roast the ones you love. It is an honor. It's seen as this, there's no awe, because even if you say the most foul, gross thing about that person, it's genuinely done with a certain amount of affection and a wink of the eye. And I mean, the great roasters are some of the most offensive comedians. Some of the best roasts, period, are the most offensive things possible being said, but it's almost like that. That's why it's this origin of, it's so important to stand up, because it's one forum where everything, there's nothing off limits. Everything is fair game because you're ultimately sitting there talking about somebody who you do love.
Yeah, there should be some shock to it. Patrice O'Neill would always say half the audience should be laughing and the other half should be horrified. It's a little bit, and that's, everyone gets their turn. That's what a roast is. It's like we're all equal in the roasting we get. But yeah, like that is a great element to it, roasting the ones you love. I think with our format, we're able to get away with, at least for our live show, we're able to get away with stuff like roasting Hitler because we can change up the feel to the roast. We can change up like the jokes, and everyone wants to shit on Hitler. So
That is true. You got to find that commonality,
yeah, that's right.
I certainly think one of the things that helps us kind of break that format without being gross about it is that there is the historical component. At all times, you're discussing history, you're presenting information, you're looking at something that is extremely true in the course of humanity. Like, we've put Hitler on our stage a few times in a few different forms. The most recent, obviously, being Gilbert Gottfried, one of the kings of roasting, played Hitler on Netflix. But we didn't roast him. We were roasting Anne Frank. And that one causes the controversy because people think, how can you roast Anne Frank? But from our perspective, it was always like if you roasted Hitler on Netflix, that would, at first glance, be more offensive to the comedic world of like, oh, no, but he's getting a dinner? Like, he's getting his own...
They assume a roast is like gonna just be hate on the person, I think, and they don't really, like, a lot of people don't even watch the episode sometimes if anyone's like hating on it, and then later, like there's been 2 different online journalists that don't watch it and write hate for it, and then go back and like retract it and be like, actually, it was pretty good. I watched it. That's all I had to do. So I think anyone who's like, oh, I don't like that they're roasting that, well, they haven't seen it yet. And then, you know, same with our live shows. If they like, sometimes before we got on Netflix, people were like, we hate that you're roasting Helen Keller. And we're like, well, you don't know what we're doing, so you got to come to the show first and then figure out what the feel is.
The touchiest live show I think the touchiest, the one show that to me could have caused the most backlash in any form was when we roasted God.
Yes, we roasted God, and it was a packed house.
It was a historical
really
roast as opposed to a fictional roast. So we treated it as history because, as we said at the top of that show, whether God exists in a real form or not, it doesn't matter. He has still affected more history than anybody else we'd ever talk about.
And with that said, here's Noah.
We brought out all of the biblical figures like Noah and Moses and the Virgin Mary, and then we had 2 characters that to me kind of were the conceits that let you know we're being silly. Like, we're not trying to make a grand statement on the existence of God. We're trying to present the figure that we know and give them the roast that we would in that vein. So we had Keith Carey play Satan.
Oh,
wish
God.
We
did bring Hitler.
We should have had Hitler roast God. That would have been amazing. Next time. So Keith Carey played Satan. So we have this completely silly character. But then we made sure we included Santa Claus. And I always felt like having Santa Claus there was the wink and the smile of like, guys, it's Santa Claus. Like, you can't, there's no way you can think I'm being serious about that I'm actually trying to tell you anything about God. This is it's comedy.
We didn't even want Satan to be there. We misspelled Santa at first and sent it to the wrong person. So both of them showed up. And then we had Jesus at the very end.
Yeah.
And, we do roasts like that all the time. And I think once people come to see it, they get kind of more of a feel of what we're going for. It's silly, you know?
It's always in good, especially with comedy. It's always silly. It's always in good fun. The idea above everything else is to laugh and have a good time. Mm-hmm. The rest of it, the idea that there could be learning some facts about history or addressing serious issues or any of those things are, to me, kind of second to the idea of let's have fun and let's laugh. And in history, there's plenty to laugh at, and I think we've done a good job at laughing at it.
And we're still not done with history. We have a lot more figures that we haven't even roasted yet, so we'll get to them eventually. We just did Titanic last week, and not the movie, the historical event.
No DiCaprio?
There was a Jack and Rose appearance. We managed. We figured out a way.
See, like, that's it. Like, it's silly. So yes, we took it. We made sure we pointed out to everyone who was on the show and who was at the show, like, this is the actual historical event. We opened up by saying, so this is the historical event, not the movie. And then I was like, Ryan said that, and I was like, okay, so, but by round of applause, who likes the movie? And they all applauded. And I was like, and who likes a tragic event that kills 1,500 people?
Standing ovation.
Way bigger applause for the actual historical event.
Those monsters.
But we then had Jack and Rose make like a surprise celebrity drop-in, because you're at the Comedy Store. Like, Dave Chappelle could drop in at any moment. Jack and Rose just happened to show up.
You touched briefly on this, that you had some backlash on some of your content previously. Can you actually share a specific time where you had backlash on a content that you made, whether it's historical roast or not, and how you actually handle that?
So when we first roasted Helen Keller, I posted a picture of the poster.
This is one of my favorite stories of all time, by the way.
I posted a pic. This was like maybe less than 2 years into the show, and and we had just started. We'd been performing at Nerd Melt for maybe a year, and I posted it, and I just hashtagged Helen Keller, not thinking much of it, not realizing her devoted fans are all over Instagram looking for something to hate on.
Devoted Helen Keller fans.
On Instagram, of all things.
On Instagram, yes.
Like, those are are things that don't go together.
So first, before I start this, the person who trolled me is not deaf or blind. I made sure to research that before I went off. So she like commented like, "How dare you? This is so disrespectful to Helen Keller. Why would you make fun of her in front of people?" Like, I'm sure she didn't sound like that, but it's fun thinking that she's like the Shakespearean kid. So she was like very mad. And I was like, first of all, I'd like to point out that a roast is an honor in the roasting world, except for Hitler. And we're bringing her for more people to learn about. And I just, I want, and what makes you think that we're not going to point out her theological views and her religious views and other things,
Which we did, by the way.
Yeah, maybe not, but but I was just explaining. I was like that. So I'm sure if you come see the show, you realize that it is meant respectfully. And then Eddie commented and was like, "Yeah, so disrespectful, Ryan. Why would you roast Helen Keller?
You monster!"
She has a team, and my co-host just like all of a sudden is on her side.
Also, once we looked at this person's Instagram, we did find out it was a 15-year-old girl that Ryan was having an Instagram fight.
Oh, God.
She was fierce.
She won the battle, to be honest. That's why I had to side with her, because I was like, yeah, you
No,
monster.
she actually responded. She was like, "I understand that. I'm respectful of that." And then my other friend was like, "You don't know this show!" Like, he was defending us. I was like, dude, calm down.
Well, you got to start them early. If they're going to attack you online, you've really got to start them early nowadays. It's really important.
Yeah, I think it kind of makes you more internet famous if someone's hating on you. So
It's true. You got to have the haters.
All publicity is good publicity. That's right.
that's right.
In dealing with controversy and backlash, my mind goes to what we're currently dealing with, and I don't even want to say currently dealing with, but we've had some people not appreciate that we roasted Anne Frank. And the first thing for me was always very simple, which was we released this to 191 countries, millions and millions of people. Inevitably, somebody wasn't going to like it,
Right.
which is theoretically tough in a moment where you're like, oh, you're right, somebody's really going to dislike what we're doing. But ultimately, when I just thought about it pragmatically, the amount of people, eventually somebody's just, I go on Netflix and there are some shows and movies that I'm just like, yeah, I'm not that interested in that thing. And then I recognize there are some people that watch it and have a strong enough, look, I've been a jerk, and I say this now because we've gone through it, but I've definitely tweeted when I thought that an actor wasn't good in a movie, or a TV show wasn't what I thought it should be, or a movie kind of fell flat, right? We all have those moments. And so I was like, inevitably somebody is going to see this and not like it. And when you roast Anne Frank, you put Gilbert Gottfried on stage as Hitler, you understand there are also going to be some people they're not going to get what you mean by it. And I say that because my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and that came up in pre-production and production. This was always a talking point because my grandmother was in Auschwitz and in the death camps for a year of her life. That actually almost lined up with the times. We think that it lined up with the times when Anne Frank was in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. And then my grandmother survived and went on and wrote her own memoir and painted and sculpted from her experiences. She toured the country and the world, showing off her artwork and talking about her experiences. And she wound up doing incredible work to help start the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Manhattan, where she lived out her life. Like, she was a true survivor and a success story. And so I always looked at it as, first, this moment where the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor, like, that's the ultimate realization, is that Hitler tried to kill my grandmother. And not only did she survive, but she thrived and got to America. And she raised a son who had the opportunity to go on stage and make fun of Hitler, to demean the person who tried to extinguish our family. And so when I looked at the criticisms against it, I was, first off, very, very proud of the episode that we made and the story that we told and how we dealt with all of the weight of the Holocaust and Anne Frank and Hitler and the subject matter. If you go and you watch that episode, the story is the perpetrators of war never face the consequences of war. The victims are human beings. They're just average citizens who are trying to do better and get caught up in it. And some people don't get it. Some people don't want to get that. Some people it's just not for. And so when I faced that criticism, it was much easier to contextualize the amount of people and then just know where I stood with my place in history with my own family of like, all right, like my dad was cool with it. My grandmother's not with us now, but we say she'd be cool with it because otherwise if she wasn't cool with it, it's too late now. She's not here to explain.
She never met Gilbert.
Oh God. Gilbert Gottfried sat and read through my grandmother's memoir with me on the day of the shoot. We flipped through every single page. He looked at her artwork. He took the book home.
Oh, wow.
He wasn't supposed to.
He stole it from me.
Yeah, he waited until I was in the bathroom.
Tell that Furth kid I said goodbye. For my place, I made peace with that very much. If somebody doesn't get... First off, I understand that at a very quick glance, you're going to make fun of a girl who got killed by Nazis. I get that at the first glance. If you don't understand roasts as a concept, if you're not into that idea, I can see how it ruffles feathers. But I stand by not just the work we did, but my grandmother survived the Holocaust, and I got to hand her memoir to Gilbert Gottfried, who played Hitler, and we genuinely made fun of Hitler by saying, "You're being played by the loudest, most annoying Jew we could possibly find." You know? I don't know.
Would you say there's any historical figure that's actually safe from a roast?
My first inclination is no. As a comedian, I don't think anything should... As a human being, I don't think talking about things should ever be off limit. I don't think there's anything that you should not be able to approach. And especially when it comes to a comedic point of view, the minute you start limiting one thing, you're just trimming the edges until you have nothing left. There are things that I would say we would hold off on, or you do have to understand that, the comparison being things like World War II. The majority of the people who lived through World War II are either no longer with us, unfortunately, or are at an age where they've coped with it and either sadly seen other tragedies or had the time and the honor to face those things that as a society we have helped them deal with it up to this point. Even things like the Vietnam War, you still get people who are sensitive to it. You just try to make sure that because we don't mean harm by anything we're doing, that anytime there is a sensitive subject, I just say, like 9/11 is one of those things. We've had Bin Laden on a stage under a roast called Evil Dictators. You just want to be cautious because you don't want to purposefully jab people in the wrong way. But I would say I would do a roast of Bin Laden or 9/11 or something along those lines, just knowing that the timing would have to be right and the way you treat it has to be right so that you aren't outright offending people. If there's ever a joke that you don't want to hear, it's not the subject that's wrong, it's our ability to be ready to hear that thing that comes into question. So you face down what is it we're really having the issue with? How do we address that overall? That's how I would do it. If there was someone or something you're like, ooh, that's tough, I'd be like, okay, then what wouldn't make it tough? What would make that palatable and enjoyable?
Well, I think we all learn in different ways. And for many people, for instance, if you say, hey, who wants to go into a room with 100 other people for 2 hours and talk about 9/11? No one's going to raise their hands. But as soon as you say, hey, who wants to sit in a room for 2 hours and roast the shit out of Osama bin Laden, everyone's going to raise their hand ideally. And I think it's just a different way of learning, because the people who are laughing, the people who are hearing the jokes are still getting a sense of what happened and still understand the seriousness of it. But it's just they have to cope in their own way, or they have to get through that information in their own way. And sometimes humor can be the best medicine to get through those situations that sometimes we try to block out from ourselves, all the time, whether it's a situation like 9/11 or the Holocaust or many other things. It's important to understand that it happened and to recognize that it happened, because that's how we learn. Now, out of curiosity, we've kind of heard you guys mention about your journey with the live show, and then also going into some of the episodes from Netflix. What was that journey like, going from historical roast live in Hollywood to a series on Netflix with Jeff Ross?
He lost the earbud for a second.
I lost the earbud.
He asked if what it was like going from the live show to the Netflix show.
I'd love to hear what your experience was with that.
Well, I mean, I'm still kind of going through it. It's pretty crazy, because when we first sat down, we talked. He asked like, where do you see this going as a show? And that's like asking on the first day, where do you see this relationship going? I had no.
Where are we going to be in 5 years, Ryan?
Yeah, are we gonna be engaged or have a kid or so what is it going on?
Not do you want kids? How many kids do you want?
So we didn't think about, would you like your show to get married to Netflix was not part of the plan. But I mean, it was like something that we eventually like. The more we thought about it, Eddie was like, I can see this going, past TV show, like TV show and a book. Like I can see this being a game. I can see this being like a theme park. And then he started going crazy. Put the spoon in your mouth. Put the spoon in your mouth.
Oh my God! Historical roast. The theme park is fucking brilliant.
You're welcome.
What do you call it? The roller coaster, the FDR roller coaster. Come the fuck on.
They strap your legs in. They don't strap your body.
FDR bumper cars. And they look like wheelchairs.
Princess Diana bumpers.
Oh God, that's terrible. I fucking love that.
It's terrible. I love it.
It's the roller
Write that
coaster of
down.
the Great Depression, right? You see how it just writes itself?
Yeah. See how you feel about it tomorrow, though. Just.
yeah, but it's still there tomorrow.
Yeah, at 10 a.m. tomorrow, I'll get an email. This isn't a bad idea, dude.
No, the email's going to be like, we probably shouldn't drink whiskey in the middle of interviews anymore.
This is fair. I had whiskey earlier.
That was earlier.
So we absolutely kind of thought about it beforehand, but now that it's happening, it's like a crazy dream. It's like, am I in a weird virtual reality program that's like making my dreams come true? So I mean, and then especially like, it feels like a weird story because Meltdown has since closed down, and that was like our home and where we started the show basically. So like after that we were kind of depressed, and then in that like a few months later really we had heard the news that the show would be picked up by Netflix, and we'd be getting 6 episodes, and that was scary because like right before that I was like, what is going to happen?
Don't touch the table.
Sorry. I just do it when you shake your head. And so I was kind of like nervous up until that point, and then just like all this like relief and like joy, like it's still like I'm still processing it in a way because it's been a whole year, but I'm still like trying to, it's a dream because like that's kind of what we've been training for. It's been like this fun thing we've been doing, and now all of a sudden it's being viewed in 191 languages. Languages?
Countries. I don't know if there's 100. I don't know if there's 191 languages in the world. Like if you said, Eddie, how many different?
I think there's more.
How many languages are there in the entire world?
I'd say 300.
You think 300?
I'd say 300.
I'm gonna look it up right now.
Distinct individual languages.
More than 300. In the 300s is what I'm saying. How many countries are there?
I don't know how many countries.
I'm gonna say 221.
I'll be honest. I only know how many countries we're in. I don't know how many.
We counting islands? What are we doing?
So we did Google this, by the way.
Yeah.
We wanted to make sure. We wanted to fact check.
Yeah.
And this is what we
Look,
got.
there can't be 100 different languages. There's less than 100.
300 something.
There's less than 100.
There are roughly 6,500 spoken languages in the world today.
We were basically both wrong.
Yeah, we might as well have both said $1.
Lord of the Rings and Star Trek languages. Are we
it
South Rocky?
Doesn't
Or can I
matter
do
at this
Rocky?
point. At 6,000, you could add those in, and it would not statistically make a difference.
Add another number. I'm gonna make up my own language tomorrow.
Wow. From my end, from day one, I saw this as a TV show. Because in the simplest form of trying to explain it both to Sammy and our partner, to Ryan and our partner Sammy, and then anybody else we were talking to, the obvious comparisons to TV roasts happen right away. Right at that time, it's a Comedy Central roast, but with a historical figure in the hot seat. And if that's how we're looking at it, and we're talking about an hour-long program, to me, like right off the bat, if I'm using a TV show to tell you what it is, then to me it was always fit to format for television. Like Ryan said, in the journey we've been on and the surreal feeling of actually seeing it through from beginning to end, from standing in Meltdown saying, what if we did this, to sitting down at Panera Bread, to then 6 weeks later doing our very first live show and going from there all the way to knowing we saw it at this point up to the fullest realization of that show possible. The best version of it, I think, is I am so grateful for that opportunity. I know how lucky we are to go on that journey, but the beauty of actually watching to see what it would look like, to say, because what we did for 4.5 years before that happened was cast our friends and great comedians as historical figures and watch them make fun of each other. And then one day, Bob Saget walks into a writer's room and reads a script that everybody helped write, where he's going to play Abe Lincoln across from John Stamos' John Wilkes Booth. And you're like, well, that's a fun
Abe Lincoln,
casting.
the very first historical figure we ever roasted.
Or
full circle.
You get Gilbert Gottfried, a comedic legend, one of the original roast people, and you're going to get him to play Hitler. Gilbert walked around the set all day saying, this was the role I was born to play. So the full realization
That's
of
your
getting...
Iago?
Sort of.
He voices him in different languages in all the countries.
I can do Gilbert Gottfried as Hitler in 19 different languages. It's the most fun. We're playing with the biggest toys possible in the most fun game that we've ever played, with some of the most fun people. Working with Jeff Ross has been one of my favorite experiences ever. So much fun. He is an incredible human being and a phenomenal television producer and an amazing comedian, and he knew how to approach the subject matter in a way that we didn't, but he worked incredibly hard to honor what we had done and also truly translate it in his way. Very much what we made for Netflix is the live version of the show that we've been making since day one. On our very 5th show, we roasted Caesar and Cleopatra, and Julius Caesar ended the roast with an impromptu rap. Like, he rapped his set the way Freddie Mercury sang his set. And it was moments like that we told Jeff about, that he made sure to include because he saw the same show that we did that could really be anything. Right? You could have any characterization. You could have Julius Caesar pretend he had no idea Mark Antony hooked up with Cleopatra and spend his entire set pretending he can't get through it, and then Ryan Felipe crushes it. This is the most fun you could possibly have, having done this version of the show.
Speaking of the live show that you ran for 4.5 years, what would you say is what was one of the hardest things to handle or work with when you ran that live event?
The whole show is a beast of a show. In terms of producing a live comedy show once a month, and at sometimes there were months we did 3 in a single month. We contact up to 8 we have up to 8 comedians on the show. I think our top we've ever done is 9 or 10 comedians on a single show. We had a very long one time.
Star Wars.
In fact, it was the Macho Man roast. I think the Macho Man roast had the most people.
We had a lot more people.
So in the same month we did our first 3-show month, we also had one show have the most people on it. But you're talking about making sure that you're getting really good comedians, people who are going to do great, who fit the character in some way. We cast against type constantly in every form and fashion, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're matching the performance that you think you're going to get from this comedian to the character that they're playing. You then have to costume anywhere from, when we started, we were costuming 2 out of the 7 comedians. Now we're up to everyone who's on stage, including the 2 of us, are in a costume. So you're talking about the possibility of 10 different distinct costumes that are period ready for anything that could come. You need to draw a crowd, so we had to become marketers and promoters and producers in that sense. People cancel close to the show. We've had to replace people close to it. The whole show is a challenge. On that note, I don't think of the challenge itself. It's always a fun problem to solve. It's always a puzzle to put together. And I always remind myself, you want to make something. We have something that we're doing. There's a great episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee where Jerry Seinfeld is talking to Gary Shandling, and he's like, everyone complains, everyone who has a show whines about how tough it is to, he's talking to Dave Chappelle, and he says, everyone whines about how tough it is to make a show. Like, yeah, it's tough, but you were making something for somebody else to enjoy. And I've sat down and watched enough TV shows. It was finally my turn to make one for somebody else to sit down and watch. I had to contribute back because I've just watched before. So the challenge is, it can be immense with a live show. And the toughest ones really are when you put, as Lorne Michaels says, you put in as much effort making a bad show as you do a good show. But if there's a show that for some reason that it just falls flat, or maybe we have a good show but the audience is low or the energy isn't there, the toughest ones are putting in the same amount of effort and getting those returns where you're just like, oh man, I wish tonight was a little bit better. I wish the audience was larger, or I wish we had done better. Or you get one take with a live show, and at the end of that night, you are not roasting Helen Keller again for another year and a half at best, you know? And so you put in a lot of effort. Any show you make, anything you make creatively, the podcast you guys have on right now is an immense effort to put together. I mean, the story of just how we got through this tonight, the effort we put in tonight, everything's a challenge in that vein. But I also don't look at it for my own sanity. I just remind myself what we're doing and why.
I think that's always a big thing with any kind of creative endeavor too, is to remember that why. I think there are many people that tend to lose it over time and forget why they were doing it in the first place. I don't know, have you guys kind of come across that? I mean, you've worked with a lot of different comedians and a lot of different platforms and stuff like that, or anything that kind of jumps out to you concerning just where it just felt like someone just didn't really remember the why of what they were doing. You don't have to mention names or anything specific, but just kind of, does it seem to be kind of territory that you come across?
Coming across like they don't. What do you mean exactly? They don't know.
Like you've seen
what they're doing up there as a roaster, or
like they've kind of forgot like the big why of why they're doing what they're doing, whether it's comedy, stand-up, roasting, anything like that.
I think that the majority, especially in the stand-up comedy community, but I think in most of creativity and entertainment, I think a lot of LA, especially on the level where you're chasing things and you're working towards the goals, I think a lot of us recognize and remember why we're doing it, and recognize and appreciate and understand and connect through the struggle as well. Mm-hmm. In stand-up comedy, you're talking about a very long road till somebody can become a national headliner and make money off of just stand-up comedy. So side jobs, extra work, angling things, changing it up, working hard on top of working hard, writing new material, all of the elements that you need to put together as a stand-up comedian, you share with each other. So the only people who I think don't appreciate it in that sense are ones that tend to walk away from it for one thing or another. But in general, in our community especially, I don't find people forget why they're doing it. And a lot of times we do connect and relate to it. Sometimes I think it is tough for all of us to remember that why we're doing it is for the audience. That as much fun as we are having, we're not doing this for us. If anytime I found that selfish thought comes into my head, I lose everything entirely. And I remember, oh, it's for the show, it's for the people. My fun comes from some other stuff, and don't get me wrong, I love what we do both on stage and when we're on set making a television show. So much fun. But it isn't truly done for me. It's done for the people who sat down and watched it on Netflix and were taken out of their head for 30 minutes so they could forget their problems and have a good time, or wanted to laugh because they haven't, or just enjoy those moments of respite or the fun and entertainment of sitting around with a bunch of friends and laughing at this ridiculous show that all of a sudden you guys connect over. The one area I will say that I've found sort of a delineation in comedy specifically for me, but in general, is the difference between people who do make something and people who don't make something, and people in the business specifically that don't make something, that don't have a show or a project or a thing that they're working on. I think have a tougher time understanding some of the constraints and challenges of making something, and I'll find that the criticisms that come from them usually don't ring as true with me, because I can recognize it's coming from a place where like, oh, there's a simple answer to what your criticism is. And if you saw what we saw in getting there, like if you knew how many comedians were out of town that day for that role, you'd understand why it was cast with somebody that you didn't agree with, you know, or those kinds of things where you're just like, I can tell that you don't know the challenges we went through just to get to the place we were at. Of course, there's a better version of the thing out there somewhere. Like, time and money, kid. You know, that's where I find the real delineation. But everyone, and in fact, since getting this show picked up for television, I've told everyone in our community that the response from the community has meant more than actually getting the show, because the love and support and outpouring from our friends, you know, our comrades, the comedians that we know, that we've grown up with, some who've been on the show and some who haven't, but just our, you know, the people closest to us, that support has been phenomenal.
That's fantastic. And you know, as we can see, Historical Roast has grown into so much more, between getting onto Netflix, but also growing a very strong and adamant community behind it, both from comedians who have performed, like you said, on stage or off, or, you know, have just know you guys and have seen it and heard about it. But you're also working on another project now, which is the Fictional Roast. Can you give us a little bit more information on that, as well as kind of what you plan on doing with it in the next, you know, few months or year?
So we started in 2016, Fictional Roast.
It was obvious we were going to do it eventually, because when we first sat down to talk over Historical Roast, the two names that came up, like, would we roast these two historical figures?
No, that's fictional.
It was Superman.
It
was Superman and Santa Claus. And immediately we're like, it was one of those like, no wait, that's a second show. Put them aside, and we will get to it. And it was in 2016. In 1 month,
we decided to roast Hitler. No. We decided to roast Harry Potter.
You can tell with this show, Hitler comes up.
We roasted him so many times. We might as well combine them.
It might as well be called
Hitler Potter.
So in 1 month, it was our very first time performing at the Comedy Store. We roasted dead comedians at the Comedy Store: Robin Williams, George Carlin, Richard Pryor. We roasted the Macho Man Randy Savage at Historical Roast, and that was the month we started Fictional Roast, and we roasted Harry Potter. We had the 3 shows in a single month. We like them for very similar and very different reasons from Historical Roast. It provides an even more ridiculous and insane avenue to write roast jokes and become characters and change this narrative that we're in. Every one of them comes with very ardent fan bases who love that thing. In fact, most of the fictional roasts that we do, the audience ends up knowing more about that property than Ryan and I.
Yeah, like we did Disney Princesses, and we're like, oh yeah, this audience is they're more fans than we are, I think. And Back to the Future as well.
I had not watched almost any Game of Thrones when we watched. In fact, the story of the Game of Thrones roast was we're kind of teaching Eddie what Game of Thrones is. Just play the village idiot at all times, you know.
Which is like teaching me for Historical Roast everything.
Oh, like the wrestling roast, like anytime.
Oh yeah, and then when
I'm a big wrestling fan.
We
I love
roasted
wrestling.
Alexander Hamilton, and we were teaching Eddie everything basically that night, and that also had a fan base. So there's different historical figures as well as fictional characters that will roast, and it will already have like a big group of fans. Maybe the God roast were all big fans of God, and they're like, finally, he got a roast.
There were a couple people at that roast who looked like they were about to meet him.
Oh boy.
But fictional roast is fun. And
they didn't have a disease. I just wanted to.
Ryan's pointing out they were
They
just
did not have a
old.
disease.
This was
They
an
were
elderly
just old.
We're
person
not
joke.
children on the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
In his view, I'm elderly because I don't have hair on my head and some gray in my beard, and I actually put
You
more
look
than
like
a
your name
t-shirt
is
on.
Lawyer Grandpa.
It's Grandpa Esquire, thank you.
LLC.
LLC. So with Fictional Roast, we alternate between the two. For a while at Nerd Melt, it was just month to month. We'd go back and forth. We've also been running simultaneously at the Comedy Store since 2016. So within those, we just vary them up and make sure that schedules kind of balance out. There are plenty of options with Fictional Roast as well of people that we still want to do. I'd love to do it on television pretty soon. We're going to start to shop that around and see if somebody's interested in producing fictional roasts. And just like Historical Roast, we'd love to take that to some festivals and take it around the country. I think these are shows that travel well and would be... I always love the live comedy experience. So as much as we do on television, I would always love to take the live show places and meet the people who are watching it on TV and show them what we do on a monthly basis in the Comedy Store, but in their hometown. And I think both of those shows would do really well all over the place. Maybe run a weekend with both of them or something, But that's what I'd love to do with Fictional Roast. It's what just as much fun, just with a different character.
I love to come to Memphis and roast Elvis. I want to go to Virginia and roast Thomas Jefferson. Let's do it.
What about fiction? Because they asked about fiction.
No, we're back on historical. You go to Disneyland and roast the princesses.
I'm sure you can't tell that it's
wherever Back to the Future was.
Wait, go back and ask me that question. Re-ask me the question about what the biggest challenge with the show is.
It's Eddie.
This is Ryan Pigg.
And this is Eddie Furth.
Don't forget to follow us online at I am Eddie Furth.
And at Ryan Pigg.
Also at Historical Roast.
And at Fictional Roast.
And check out Historical Roast with Jeff Ross on Netflix.
Just Netflix.
Historical Roast.
Teaching history a lesson. Good night.
Thank
the
you,
one.
Connecticut.
Thank you.
For those of you watching on YouTube, Twitch, or listening in on iTunes or Podbean, thanks for tuning in to another episode of MindMineTV's Creator Series. Our comments are open for further discussion, so feel free to dig in and ask any questions you may have for Ryan and Eddie. And don't forget to follow, share, and subscribe to get notified when more episodes go live. And for more information on the Creator Series and our channel, come on over to mindminepod.com. This is Evin and Tatiana. We're MindMineTV. See you next time.